Picture this: you walk into a room and there's something different about you. You're not checking your phone every 30 seconds. You're not seeking validation from every conversation. You're not desperately trying to impress anyone or prove your worth. Instead, you carry yourself with a quiet confidence that comes from within. Men notice this immediately, but not just men, everyone does. There's an invisible force field around you, a magnetic quality that draws people in while simultaneously showing them you don't need their approval to feel complete. This is the power of detachment. And today I'm going to share with you why this ancient wisdom, practiced by monks and sages for thousands of years, holds the secret to not just attracting the right people into your life, but transforming your entire existence into something extraordinary. My name is inspired by the teachings of Master Shiheng Yi, and I've spent years studying the intersection between ancient wisdom and modern relationships. What I've discovered will challenge everything you think you know about attraction, love, and personal power. Let me start with a story that will illustrate exactly what I'm talking about. There was a woman named Sarah who came to one of my workshops 3 years ago. She was exhausted, emotionally, physically, spiritually drained. She'd been in a series of relationships where she gave everything of herself, where she bent over backwards to make men happy, where she was constantly available, constantly accommodating, constantly seeking their approval and affection. Sarah would text back immediately, cancel her plans when a man called, agree to things she didn't really want to do, all in the hope of being loved. She was what we might call over-invested. And paradoxically, the more she gave, the less interested these men became. The more available she was, the more they pulled away. The more she tried to prove her worth, the less valuable she appeared in their eyes. Then something changed. Sarah's father became ill, and suddenly she had to redirect all her energy toward her family. She stopped being immediately available to the man she was dating. She couldn't respond to texts for hours, sometimes days. She had to cancel dates. She became, out of necessity, detached from the outcome of this relationship because she had more important things to focus on. And something miraculous happened. This man, who had been growing distant, suddenly became intensely interested in her again. He started pursuing her with an energy she'd never seen before. He began asking when he could see her, making elaborate plans to work around her schedule, showing up in ways he never had when she was completely available to him. Sarah learned one of life's most powerful lessons: the things we chase run away from us, and the things we're detached from often come toward us. Now, before we go any further, let me be absolutely clear about something. When I talk about detachment, I'm not talking about being cold, uncaring, or manipulative. I'm not suggesting you play games or treat people poorly. The detachment I'm speaking of comes from a place of inner strength, self-respect, and spiritual maturity. It's not about being detached from people. It's about being detached from outcomes. There's a profound difference, and understanding this difference will transform not just your relationships, but your entire approach to life. In Buddhist philosophy, which has influenced my thinking deeply, there's a concept called upadana, which means clinging or attachment. The Buddha taught that attachment is the root of all suffering. When we cling desperately to outcomes, to people, to specific results, we create suffering for ourselves and often push away the very things we desire most. Think about water for a moment. If you try to grab water with a closed fist, it slips through your fingers. But if you cup your hands gently, the water settles in your palms. This is the essence of detached engagement, holding space for something beautiful while not grasping at it desperately. I want to share with you another story, this one from ancient China. There was once a farmer whose horse ran away. His neighbors came to console him, saying, "How terrible! What bad luck!" The farmer simply replied, "Maybe." The next day, the horse returned, bringing with it 3 wild horses. The neighbors exclaimed, "How wonderful! What good fortune! Again, the farmer said, maybe. The following day, his son tried to ride one of the wild horses and was thrown off, breaking his leg. The neighbors lamented, "How awful! What a disaster!" The farmer's response remained the same, maybe. A week later, military officers came to the village to draft young men into the army, but they passed over the farmer's son because of his broken leg. The neighbors rejoiced, "How lucky! What a blessing!" And still the farmer said, maybe. This story illustrates the essence of detachment, not being overly invested in any particular outcome, because we understand that life is constantly changing, and what appears to be good or bad in the moment may be something entirely different in the broader context of our lives. When a woman embodies this level of detachment, men find it incredibly attractive because it represents a level of emotional maturity and inner strength that is rare in our culture. We live in a society that encourages us to be constantly reactive, constantly seeking external validation, constantly attached to immediate outcomes. Social media has made this even worse. We post something and immediately start checking for likes and comments. We send a text and expect an immediate response. We meet someone we're interested in and immediately start planning our future together. This constant state of attachment and expectation creates anxiety, neediness, and ultimately repels the very connections we're seeking. But a woman who has learned the art of detachment operates from a completely different energy. She engages fully with life while holding outcomes lightly. She can enjoy a conversation with a man without immediately wondering if he'll call her again. She can go on a date and simply be present for the experience without attaching her self-worth to whether there's a second date. This doesn't mean she doesn't care or that she's not interested in forming meaningful connections. It means she's not dependent on any particular outcome for her sense of self or her happiness. And this independence, this self-sufficiency, this inner stability is magnetic. Let me tell you about another woman, Maria, who exemplified this perfectly. Maria was an artist who had spent years developing her craft. She was passionate about her work, had a rich inner life, strong friendships, and diverse interests. When she met David at a gallery opening, she was genuinely interested in getting to know him, but she wasn't desperate for his attention. They had a great conversation. And when David asked for her number, she gave it to him. But then Maria went back to her life. She didn't sit by her phone waiting for him to call. She didn't check his social media obsessively. She didn't cancel plans with friends just in case he wanted to see her. She continued painting, continued seeing friends, continued living her full, rich life. When David did call, Maria was genuinely pleased to hear from him, but she didn't rearrange her entire schedule to accommodate him immediately. She had plans that weekend, so they made plans for the following week. When they went out, Maria was fully present and engaged, but she didn't spend the entire date trying to impress him or figure out what he wanted to hear. This natural detachment, this comfort with her own life and priorities, made David more and more interested in her. He found himself thinking about her between their dates, wondering what she was working on, curious about her thoughts and opinions. The fact that she had her own life, her own interests, her own boundaries made him want to become part of that world rather than expecting her to revolve around his. Now, I want to address something important here. Some of you might be thinking, but doesn't this seem calculated? Doesn't this seem like game playing? And that's a valid concern because there is a difference between authentic detachment and strategic manipulation. True detachment doesn't come from a place of trying to attract someone or make them want you more. It comes from a genuine understanding that your worth and happiness don't depend on any external person or outcome. It comes from having developed such a rich relationship with yourself and such a fulfilling life that you genuinely don't need someone else to complete you. This is what the ancient Stoics called preferred indifference. They recognize that while we might prefer certain outcomes, like having loving relationships, professional success, or good health, our inner peace and self-worth don't depend on these things. We can work toward them, enjoy them if we have them, but we don't cling to them desperately. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and philosopher, wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This is the foundation of true detachment, recognizing that while we can't control outcomes, we can control our responses, our choices, and our inner state. When a woman operates from this place of inner strength, men recognize it immediately. They sense that she's not needy, not desperate for their validation, not going to lose herself in the relationship. This is incredibly attractive because it suggests that a relationship with her will enhance their life rather than drain their energy. Think about the people in your own life who you find most attractive, not just romantically, but in general. I'm willing to bet they're people who seem comfortable in their own skin, who have their own interests and passions, who don't seem to need constant reassurance or validation from others. There's something magnetic about people who are complete in themselves while still being open to connection with others. I want to share a quote from the great poet Rumi that captures this beautifully. Let yourself be silently drawn by the strange pull of what you really love. It will not lead you astray. When you're connected to what you really love, your passions, your values, your authentic self, you naturally become less attached to external outcomes because you're fulfilled from within. This brings me to another crucial aspect of detachment, the relationship you have with yourself. A woman who is attractive through detachment has cultivated a deep, loving relationship with herself. She enjoys her own company. She has inner resources, creativity, curiosity, spirituality, whatever feeds her soul, that sustain her whether she's in a relationship or not. I remember reading about a study done by psychologist Dr. Helen Fisher, who has spent decades researching romantic love and attraction. She found that people who have what she calls self-expansion, meaning they're constantly growing, learning, and developing new aspects of themselves, are consistently more attractive to potential partners than those who remain static or depend on others for their sense of identity and growth. This makes perfect sense when you think about it. If you're constantly evolving, constantly discovering new facets of yourself, constantly engaged with life in a deep way, you become an interesting person to be around. Men are drawn to women who surprise them, who challenge them intellectually and emotionally, who bring new perspectives and experiences to their lives. But if you're primarily focused on adapting yourself to what you think someone else wants, if you're constantly seeking their approval and validation, you lose this quality of self-expansion. You become predictable, and predictability, while comfortable, is not particularly attractive. Let me tell you about another woman, Jennifer, who learned this lesson in a powerful way. Jennifer had always been someone who adapted herself to whoever she was dating. If she was with someone who loved sports, she suddenly became a sports fan. If she was with someone who was into hiking, she bought all the gear and pretended to love being outdoors. She thought this adaptability made her more attractive, but actually it had the opposite effect. Men would initially appreciate her enthusiasm for their interests, but over time, they'd start to feel like they didn't really know who she was. There was no core, Jennifer, to discover, no mystery to unravel, no authentic person to fall in love with. She had become so focused on being what others wanted that she'd lost touch with what she actually wanted. Everything changed when Jennifer went through a difficult breakup and decided to take 6 months to focus entirely on herself. She stopped dating completely and instead explored what she was actually interested in when no one else was around to impress. She discovered a love of pottery that surprised her. She started volunteering at an animal shelter, which fed her soul in ways she hadn't expected. She took a writing class and found she had stories to tell. When Jennifer started dating again, she was a completely different person. She had developed genuine interests and passions. She had stories to tell that were uniquely hers. She had boundaries and preferences that came from self-knowledge rather than people pleasing. And the quality of men she attracted changed dramatically. Instead of attracting men who wanted someone to mold into their ideal companion, she started attracting men who were genuinely interested in who she was as an individual. The conversations were deeper, the connections more meaningful, and the relationships more balanced because she was showing up as a whole person rather than a half person looking for someone else to complete her. This brings me to another aspect of detachment that's crucial to understand. Detachment from the need to be in a relationship at all. Our culture sends us constant messages that we're incomplete without a romantic partner, that being single is somehow a failure or a problem to be solved. This cultural programming creates a desperate energy that actually repels healthy relationships. I want to share a story from my own life that illustrates this. Several years ago, I was working with a woman named Lisa, who was incredibly frustrated with her dating life. She was beautiful, successful, intelligent, and kind, but she couldn't seem to find a lasting relationship. Every conversation we had eventually came back to this problem. Why can't I find someone? What's wrong with me? When is it going to happen? I suggested that Lisa take a year off from dating entirely, not as a punishment or a deprivation, but as an experiment in discovering what her life could be like when it wasn't organized around finding a partner. She was resistant at first, afraid that taking a break would somehow make her even further behind in the relationship department. But Lisa was brave enough to try it, and what happened over that year was remarkable. Without the constant pressure to meet someone, without the emotional ups and downs of dating, without spending her mental energy analyzing every interaction for romantic potential, Lisa's life blossomed in ways she hadn't expected. She threw herself into her work and got a promotion she'd been wanting for years. She deepened her friendships and discovered how fulfilling platonic relationships could be. She traveled to places she'd always wanted to see but had been saving for. When I have someone to go with. She took up salsa dancing, learned to cook properly, started a meditation practice, and began writing in a journal every morning. By the end of that year, Lisa had become someone she genuinely enjoyed being. She had developed what I call relationship readiness, not the desperate readiness of someone who needs a relationship to feel complete, but the mature readiness of someone who has so much to offer because she's invested in her own growth and happiness. And then, in the most natural way possible, she met someone. Not through desperately searching or online dating or asking friends to set her up, but simply through living her life fully. She was at a bookstore, browsing in the philosophy section, something she developed an interest in during her year of self-discovery, when she struck up a conversation with a man who was looking at the same book. The relationship that developed was unlike any she'd had before. Because Lisa was no longer desperate to make any relationship work, she could evaluate this connection clearly. Because she had her own life, interests, and sources of fulfillment, she didn't lose herself in the relationship. Because she knew she could be happy on her own, she wasn't afraid to set boundaries or express her authentic opinions. The man she was dating, Michael, later told her that what attracted him most was her independence and self-sufficiency. He said he'd dated many women who seemed to want him to be their whole world, which felt overwhelming and ultimately suffocating. With Lisa, he felt like he was being invited to join an already rich and fulfilling life, rather than being expected to create that richness for her. This is the paradox of detachment. When you stop desperately seeking something, you often find it. When you stop being attached to a specific outcome, you become open to possibilities you couldn't see before. When you stop trying so hard to make something happen, you create space for things to unfold naturally. The ancient Taoist concept of Wu Wei speaks to this perfectly. Wu Wei is often translated as non-action, but it's more accurately understood as effortless action, or going with the flow. It's the idea that there's a natural rhythm to life, and when we try to force things against this rhythm, we create struggle and resistance. But when we align ourselves with the natural flow, things happen with surprising ease. I've seen this principle play out countless times in relationships. The women who are most successful in love are often those who aren't frantically trying to make love happen. They're living their lives, following their interests, being authentically themselves, and love finds them in the process. This doesn't mean being passive or never taking action. It means taking action from a place of clarity and authenticity rather than desperation and attachment. It means being proactive about creating a life you love while being detached from specific outcomes. Let me give you a practical example of what this looks like. Imagine you meet someone you're interested in at a social event. The attached approach would be to immediately start strategizing. How can I make sure they're interested in me? What should I say to impress them? How can I make sure this leads to a date? This energy of attachment creates pressure and often leads to trying too hard, being inauthentic, or appearing desperate. The detached approach would be to simply enjoy the conversation for what it is. Be genuinely curious about this person. Share authentically about yourself. If there's natural chemistry and mutual interest, great. If not, that's fine too. You've had an interesting conversation and met someone new. You're not attached to any particular outcome beyond enjoying the present moment. This detached energy is incredibly attractive because it allows the other person to relax and be themselves too. They don't feel the pressure of your expectations or the weight of your attachment to specific outcomes. They can simply enjoy getting to know you without feeling like they're being evaluated for their relationship potential. This brings me to another crucial aspect of detachment, the ability to be present in the moment rather than constantly thinking about the future. Attachment often manifests as anxiety about what's going to happen next. Will they call? Do they like me? Where is this going? This mental chatter pulls us out of the present moment and prevents us from actually connecting with the person in front of us. Detachment allows us to be fully present because we're not worried about outcomes. We can listen deeply, respond authentically, and enjoy whatever is happening right now without needing it to lead anywhere specific. I want to share a meditation technique that I've found incredibly helpful for developing this quality of present moment awareness. It's called the Maybe Mind meditation, inspired by the story I shared earlier about the farmer and his horse. Find a quiet place to sit comfortably. Close your eyes and bring to mind a situation you're attached to. Maybe someone you're hoping will call you, a job you're hoping to get, a relationship you want to work out in a certain way. Notice all the feelings that come up: anxiety, hope, fear, excitement. Now, instead of getting caught up in these feelings, simply observe them and say to yourself, maybe. Maybe this will happen the way I want it to. Maybe it won't. Maybe something completely different will happen that I can't even imagine right now. Maybe whatever happens will be exactly what I need for my growth and happiness, even if it doesn't look like what I think I want. Practice holding this maybe mind for a few minutes, allowing yourself to release attachment to specific outcomes while remaining open to all possibilities. This practice helps develop the mental flexibility and emotional equanimity that are at the heart of attractive detachment. Now, I want to address another important aspect of this topic, the difference between detachment and indifference. Some people misinterpret the concept of the detachment to mean that you should never care about anything or anyone, that you should be completely emotionally unavailable. This is not what I'm talking about at all. Detachment and caring are not mutually exclusive. In fact, true detachment often allows us to care more deeply because we're not clouded by our own needs and expectations. When you're detached from outcomes, you can truly see and appreciate another person for who they are rather than for what they can do for you or how they can make you feel. Think about the most loving people you know, perhaps a wise grandparent, a spiritual teacher, or a friend who always seems to give great advice. I'll bet these people care deeply, but they also have a quality of detachment that allows them to love without being possessive, to support without controlling, to be present without being needy. This is the kind of loving detachment that is incredibly attractive to emotionally mature men. They recognize that a woman who can love without clinging, who can be supportive without being controlling, who can be present without being possessive, is someone they can build a healthy, sustainable relationship with. I want to share another story that illustrates this beautifully. There was a woman named Anna who had been married for 15 years when her husband went through what we might call a midlife crisis. He was questioning everything about his life, including their marriage. He asked for space to figure things out, and Anna was faced with a choice. She could cling desperately to the relationship, trying to convince him to stay, or she could give him the space he needed while maintaining her own dignity and peace of mind. Anna chose detachment, but not the cold, indifferent kind. She told her husband that she loved him and wanted their marriage to work, but that she couldn't control his choices or force him to want to be with her. She would give him the space he needed, but she also wouldn't put her life on hold indefinitely waiting for him to make up his mind. Over the following months, Anna focused on her own growth and well-being. She went to therapy to work through her own issues. She reconnected with friends and hobbies she'd neglected. She took care of her physical and emotional health. She didn't spend her days obsessing over what her husband was doing or trying to manipulate him into coming back. This response surprised her husband. He had expected her to be desperate, to beg him to stay, to make the separation all about him and his needs. Instead, he watched her handle the situation with grace and strength. He saw her building a good life for herself, whether he was in it or not. And paradoxically, this made him realize what he was potentially losing. After 6 months, he asked if they could work on rebuilding their marriage. Anna was open to this, but she made it clear that she had grown and changed during their time apart, and that any reconciliation would need to be based on who they both were now, not who they had been before. Their marriage, rebuilt on this foundation of mutual respect and individual strength, became stronger than it had ever been. Anna's willingness to love her husband while being detached from the outcome of their relationship ultimately saved their marriage and transformed it into something more mature and sustainable. This story illustrates another crucial point about detachment. It often requires tremendous courage. It's much easier, in the short term, to cling desperately to relationships and outcomes than to let go and trust that whatever happens will be for the best. Detachment requires a deep faith, not necessarily religious faith, but faith in your own ability to handle whatever life brings you, faith in the process of life itself. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who was born a slave and became one of the great wisdom teachers of ancient Rome, said something that I think captures this beautifully. Don't demand that things happen as you wish, they will happen as they happen, and you will go along well. This doesn't mean being passive or never working toward your goals. It means working toward your goals while holding the outcomes lightly, being willing to adapt and find opportunity in whatever actually unfolds. I want to talk now about how this applies specifically to the modern world of dating and relationships. We live in an era of unprecedented choice and opportunity when it comes to meeting potential partners. Dating apps give us access to hundreds or thousands of potential matches. Social media allows us to stay connected to people we might have lost touch with in previous generations. This abundance of choice should theoretically make it easier to find great relationships. But in many ways, it's had the opposite effect. The paradox of choice means that many people, both men and women, struggle with commitment because they're always wondering if someone better is just a swipe away, the abundance of options can create a mindset where we're constantly evaluating and comparing rather than deeply connecting. For women, this environment can create enormous pressure to stand out, to be perfect, to immediately capture and maintain someone's attention in a sea of possibilities. This pressure often leads to exactly the kind of attached, just desperate energy that repels healthy connections. But here's where the principle of detachment becomes especially powerful in our current dating culture. In a world where everyone is trying so hard to impress, to be perfect, to immediately lock down a relationship, a woman who is genuinely detached from outcomes stands out dramatically. She's the one who isn't immediately available for a date because she has her own life and commitments. She's the one who doesn't respond to texts instantly because she's not sitting around waiting for her phone to buzz. She's the one who doesn't seem desperate to define the relationship immediately because she's comfortable with uncertainty and letting things develop naturally. This kind of detachment is like a breath of fresh air in the frantic world of modern dating. It signals emotional maturity, self-respect, and inner security, qualities that are unfortunately rare and therefore highly valued. Let me share another story that illustrates this perfectly. There was a woman named Rachel who decided to try online dating after being single for a while. But instead of approaching it with the usual anxiety and attachment, she decided to use it as an opportunity to practice detachment. Rachel created a profile that authentically represented who she was, but she didn't agonize over it or constantly update it trying to get more matches. When men messaged her, she responded if she was genuinely interested, but she didn't feel obligated to respond to everyone or to keep conversations going that weren't naturally flowing. When she did go on dates, Rachel focused on enjoying the experience and getting to know the person rather than evaluating their potential as a long-term partner or worrying about whether they were evaluating her. She didn't check her phone afterward waiting for them to text, and she didn't spend hours analyzing every interaction. Some dates led to second dates, some didn't. Some conversations faded naturally, others developed into friendships, and a few developed into more romantic connections. Rachel remained equally okay with all these outcomes because she wasn't attached to any specific result. This approach, which felt much more peaceful and sustainable than her previous dating experiences, also proved to be much more effective. The men who were genuinely interested in getting to know her were drawn to her relaxed, confident energy. They appreciated that she seemed secure and happy in her own life rather than desperately seeking validation from dating. Eventually, Rachel met David, and their relationship developed naturally and sustainably because it was built on mutual interest and compatibility rather than desperate attachment or fear of being alone. They were both whole people choosing to share their lives rather than incomplete people trying to use each other to feel complete. This brings me to another important aspect of detachment: boundaries. Women who are truly detached have clear boundaries because they're not willing to compromise their well-being or authenticity to make someone else happy or to keep them around. Boundaries aren't walls. They're not about shutting people out or being defensive. Boundaries are more like the banks of a river that allow the water to flow powerfully and purposefully rather than spreading out into a weak, shapeless flood. A woman with healthy detachment might say, I don't talk on the phone after 9 p.m. because I value my sleep and morning routine. Or, I don't change plans I've already made unless it's an emergency because I respect my commitments to myself and others. Or, I need some time to think about this decision rather than giving you an answer right now. These boundaries aren't arbitrary rules designed to be difficult. They come from self-knowledge and self-respect. They communicate that this woman values herself and expects others to value her too. And paradoxically, this often makes others value her more. Men, particularly emotionally mature men, find boundaries attractive because boundaries suggest that a woman won't lose herself in the relationship. They suggest that she has standards and self-respect, which means that if she chooses to be with him, it's because she genuinely wants to be, not because she's desperate or has no other options. I remember working with a woman named Carla who had struggled with boundaries her entire life. She was always available when men called, always willing to change her plans to accommodate them, always agreeing to things she didn't really want to do. She thought this flexibility and accommodation made her more attractive, but actually it had the opposite effect. Men would initially appreciate her accommodating nature, but over time they would start to lose respect for her. They could sense that she didn't value her own time or preferences, so why should they? Some would even start testing her boundaries more and more, seeing how much she would tolerate. Learning to set and maintain boundaries was terrifying for Carla at first. She was afraid that if she wasn't completely accommodating, men wouldn't want to be with her. But what she discovered was exactly the opposite. When Carla started saying things like, "I'd love to see you, but I already have plans this weekend. How about next Tuesday?" Or, "I'm not comfortable with that. Let's do this instead." Something interesting happened. The men who were only interested in someone they could control or manipulate quickly lost interest and moved on. But the men who were looking for a genuine partnership respected her boundaries and found them attractive. Carla eventually met someone who valued her independence and self-respect, and their relationship was built on mutual respect rather than one person constantly accommodating the other. This illustrates another benefit of detachment and boundaries. They act as a natural filtering system. When you're desperate and attached, you'll accept treatment that isn't good for you because you're afraid of losing the relationship. But when you're detached and have clear boundaries, you naturally repel people who aren't good for you while attracting those who are. It's like the difference between a lighthouse and a ship lost at sea. The ship sends out desperate SOS signals, attracting anyone who might rescue it, regardless of whether they have good intentions or the ability to actually help. The lighthouse, on the other hand, simply shines its light steadily, and those who need what it offers are naturally drawn to it. A woman who embodies healthy detachment is like a lighthouse. She's not frantically signaling for rescue because she doesn't need rescuing. She's complete in herself, but she's also a beacon that naturally attracts those who appreciate her light. Now, I want to address something that I know some of you might be thinking. This all sounds great in theory, but how do I actually develop this detachment? How do I stop being so anxious and attached when it comes to relationships? The first step is understanding that detachment is a practice, not a destination. Even the most enlightened masters still have to choose detachment moment by moment. It's not about reaching some perfect state where you never feel attached or anxious. It's about recognizing when you're caught up in attachment and gently returning to a state of detachment. One of the most powerful practices I've found for developing detachment is what I call outcome independence. This means taking actions based on what feels authentic and right to you, rather than on what you think will produce a specific outcome. For example, instead of texting someone because you want them to text you back, you text them because you genuinely have something to share and you're not attached to whether or how they respond. Instead of going on a date with the goal of making them like you go on a date with the goal of discovering whether you genuinely enjoy their company. This shift from outcome, dependent to outcome, independent action is revolutionary. It allows you to be authentic because you're not constantly trying to manipulate outcomes. It reduces anxiety because you're not constantly worried about results. And it's more attractive because people can sense when you're being genuine versus when you're performing for their approval. Another practice that's incredibly helpful is what I call expanding your identity. Most of us derive too much of our identity and self-worth from our relationships or lack thereof. We see ourselves primarily as someone's girlfriend, wife, or as someone who is single and looking. But you are so much more than your relationship status. You are your interests, your values, your dreams, your creativity, your contributions to the world, your growth, your experiences, your friendships, your family relationships, your professional life, your spiritual journey. When you expand your identity to encompass all of who you are, your relationship status becomes just one aspect of your life rather than the defining characteristic. This naturally creates detachment because you have so many other sources of meaning and fulfillment. I worked with a woman named Patricia who was completely identified with being a wife and mother. When her children left home and her marriage started struggling, she felt like she didn't know who she was anymore. Her entire identity had been wrapped up in these relationships, so when they changed, she felt lost. Patricia's journey back to herself involved rediscovering all the parts of her identity that had been dormant. She remembered that she had loved writing in college and started taking writing workshops.